Most people in the US and elsewhere have no idea that there are about 700 million people globally who have zero access to electricity.
Globally, around 700 million people still live without electricity, and of those, 600 million are in Africa. This energy gap holds back economic growth, leaving businesses, schools, and hospitals dependent on unreliable power or expensive alternatives like diesel generators. In Africa, energy poverty also drives deforestation, as millions rely on biomass like wood and charcoal for cooking. This not only accelerates climate change, but also causes dangerous indoor air pollution. Expanding access to clean energy is vital to reversing these environmental impacts and improving lives. At the Concordia Annual Summit in New York, we had the chance to sit down with Andy Herscowitz, the CEO of the Mission 300 Accelerator. Mission 300 is an ambitious initiative to connect 300 million people to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa by 2030. Mission 300 aims to speed up electrification in sub-Saharan Africa while ensuring the transition to diverse, cleaner energy sources meets growing demand and drives economic growth and job creation. Mission 300 is possible through the collective efforts of the World Bank Group, the African Development Bank Group, the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, the Rockefeller Foundation, and Sustainable Energy for All. Tune in to this interview to learn how these groups plan on electrifying 300 million people. Sitting here with Andy Herscowitz, the former leader of the U.S. Power Africa Initiative. You've done some incredible things in your career. And actually, a couple of days ago, it was announced that you're going to be the new CEO of the M300 Accelerator. So congrats to that, and congrats to the work of the Rockefeller Foundation and all the organizations that are bringing this kind of together. But yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So first question, when looking at the big challenge right now of energy access in Africa, could you talk a little bit about that challenge and, how there's solutions out there that can be implemented to actually help that problem that exists today?
So most people in the US and elsewhere have no idea that there are about 700 million people globally who have zero access to electricity. And you think about it, in a country like Nigeria alone, 87 million people have no access to electricity at all. So when you think about that, right? That's just zero access. Then most people in Africa, for example, use less than like 400 kilowatt hours of electricity per year, compared to in the US where you're using over 13,000. And so even we're sitting here in New York City right now, I'm guessing in New York City, people are probably consuming 20,000.
Right.
So it's just tiny. So there's not only is there lack of energy, but there's complete energy poverty. And what does that mean? It means that the problems get worse and worse from a poverty perspective. While everybody else is starting to use ChatGPT and things like that, that's not even in the picture. Everything that's going to make everybody else's life easier, propel you into the next century with the economy, like that's not even on the radar for people who don't even have enough electricity to power a light bulb.
Right.
And even those who have enough electricity to power a light bulb, do they have enough electricity to cook with? So you've got 3 billion people globally who still burn firewood, charcoal, and biomass for cooking. And so this is a massive problem from an economic growth standpoint. But if you think about it, Africa as a continent is going to be the most populous continent in the world by the end of this century, with 13 of the 20 largest cities in the world being in Africa. And it's not like people aren't going to go on with their lives. So what are they going to do? If they need to do something productive, they're going to burn dirty diesel generators, which are expensive and just pollute the planet. And they're going to have nothing at all. So the idea of getting everybody energy access is keeping up with the economic growth, making sure that there's jobs for people, making sure there's basic health care for people. It's the most important thing we need to address. If we're going to address any of the sustainable development goals, you've got to get electricity. It has to do with water. It has to do with health. It has to do with education. And so this is the problem that we're trying to tackle.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I grew up in the U.S. I've been in the U.S. I live in Atlanta, Georgia area. And my whole life, I've had electricity. I've had energy. It's never been a second thought, right?
Think about it, how much people freak out if there's a storm.
Yeah.
There's a storm. Yeah. Oh, we've all got to go and buy like a new electric Ford F-150 so we have a backup battery to power our house for the 4 days that I don't have electricity. But that's like an everyday thing for a huge number of people on the planet, right? And so we need to address this because it contributes to everything. Even if you think about the immigration to the U.S., like they're like, why is everybody coming to the U.S.? Well, people do have access to mobile phones and they get to see what's going on in the rest of the world. If you're like a poor person sitting anywhere in the world and you got no electricity, no job, what are you going to do? You're going to say, I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to try to find my way to the U.S. It's in our interest to address this issue, right? Because people are always looking, nobody, like if you were living in a place and you're like, I have the electricity, I don't have anything. What are you going to sit around and just stay there? Or if you see what you can get elsewhere, you're going to move. That's what people do.
All right. I mean, for us, I grew up a little bit north of Atlanta, and anytime it snowed or a snowstorm came, maybe an inch of snow, half inch of snow, you go to the grocery store and everything is sold out. People are scared. They're getting their backup generators. But it's just a reality that myself and a lot of my peers have never had to live is something without energy. And to your point, we think about clean energy.
Yeah.
If you think about a continent that's going to become the most populous, like you're saying, if we're trying to tackle greenhouse gas emissions, right, in the climate crisis, then...
But it's beyond greenhouse gas emissions, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever sat there next to a diesel generator and breathed in the air and just what it smells like? It's disgusting, right? Like you go to Delhi, the amount of pollution that's there. It's about pollution. It's about the climate, yes, and the greenhouse emissions and all these other things. But it's just basically about clean air.
Right.
It's being able to breathe. So even the people who are cooking with charcoal and biomass and all of these things in these kitchens with the smoke, the health problems are terrible. Can you imagine if you grew up with like an indoor fire in your kitchen at home and that's what you're breathing? Like just yesterday, I was with my wife and I was excited. So we just put in a new patio and I had some fire, I put a little fire pit. And she's like, I'm not going out there and getting stinking like smoke like that for the rest of the day. That's the everyday for like almost half the world.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. Well, I think now is a good segue because now we kind of understand like what's happening, right, in Africa. And I think you said 700 million people around the world, right?
And about 600 million of them are in Africa.
That's 6 out of 7. That's crazy, right?
And like I think there's like 87 million of them are in Nigeria alone.
Wow. Well, to that point, a cool thing that was news release, I think about 2 or 3 days ago, was this Mission 30 from the Rockefeller Foundation, or 300.
Yeah, it was 30 be easy for us to do.
Yeah. Mission 300, electrifying 300 million by 2030. So yeah, 300 million people. This is a huge kind of initiative, a huge task. You're tackling, I guess, half of that 600 million number that you talked.
I want us to attack all of it because honestly, we can figure out the 300. The rest should be easy to do, right?
Right.
So, but yeah, so the goal is 300 million people. It's the World Bank has concrete plans in place for 250 million. The African Development Bank has plans for 50 million. And we're coming in to support them to help them do that. So there's actual projects. There's a pipeline of projects, some existing ones, some other ones. We want to make sure that they stay on track. We want to make sure we bring in the right capital for this because it involves capital from everybody. Right. But that's the goal. Right. I like to call it, M300 plus personally.
Yeah.
Because we want to get it to universal. And if we can figure this out, I think the next piece will happen very, very quickly.
I don't want to, in my head, I'm thinking small case study. This isn't a small case study by any means. This is 300 million people. And then some
of the most challenging investment climates too.
Right. Well, my question would be, you're trying to electrify, again, 300 million. Is this all renewable energy? Is this how this works? So we're talking about solar energy for the most part, I'm guessing.
So it's a combination. The world is trending towards renewable energy. And a lot of the countries in Africa, they still, just like we do in the US, they use fossil fuels. And so you're connecting people to the grid. You don't really know but you're not saying, oh, well, we're only going to give you electricity that's going to come from solar, because if a country is using gas, then some of that electricity might come from gas. It's about the people, like right now we're sitting in this room. we don't know what's the source of our energy, but we know that we have access to electricity. We're getting electricity. So at the high level, that's the goal, is to get access to electricity. That being said, Africa as a continent has the potential to be entirely renewable. And one of the reasons, it's got tremendous geothermal resources. It's got tremendous hydropower resources, wind and solar. It's got everything you could want as a continent. Part of the problem is that all the countries that have the different resources are not necessarily interconnected. So while the prices of developing those types of renewable energy are coming down more and more, geothermal is largely in East Africa. A lot of hydros in other countries. But if you connect East Africa and for example, huge hydro projects in Zimbabwe and Zambia to countries like Botswana, Namibia, which don't have those resources, but they have tremendous potential for solar. It's like some of the best solar potential in the world. What you can do is you get that base load energy that you need, the power that runs 24 hours a day from geothermal and like hydropower. And then you can mix that with the intermittent, like the wind and the solar, when the sun's shining and then you've got batteries. And
right.
Even if you built out enough solar that only, the sun shines for, let's say, 14 hours out of the day, you can use that to charge batteries or to produce green hydrogen as well. But the least expensive thing probably right now is just to get a better operating ecosystem. And then at the household level, though, for the places that are really hard to reach, we're looking at everything from solar home systems that will power basic appliances. But that's not enough. It's a starting point. It's better than people having nothing. And then you move up to mini grids. So in remote areas where you've got a larger array of solar, or maybe some small hydro going through small rivers and streams and things like that will power a community. Or you even have these what are called mesh grids, where every house has solar panels on it, but they're interconnected and they're trading power with one another. So there's incredible technologies out there. So we're looking at all of the different approaches depending on what's appropriate in the community and what the needs are.
I mean, the note that I wrote down here is, electrification is not just a climate conversation. It goes back to poverty. It goes back to education. It goes back to everything. Because if you don't have the basic necessities of life, it's hard for, I guess, even economic progress to happen.
Absolutely. Well, let me give you an example. So there's this company that I think is really cool. We're not doing anything with them yet, but I've been tracking them for a while. It's a couple of guys. It's their third project. And they've got this thing. It's called Liquid Star. And they've got this thing called a waypoint. It's basically a mini grid, but no wires are attached to it in Djibouti. Okay. And what they've figured out is how to monetize every electron that comes out of that waypoint. So they've got a solar array, but what are they doing with it? Number one, they're using it to charge batteries that get popped into electric two-wheelers. Okay, so you've got now these electric motorcycles. Those electric motorcycles will then deliver batteries within, I think, like a 50-kilometer radius. People go into their house with that battery, and then they're powering their TV, their lights, and everything's with that battery. So like the swappable battery.
Wow.
They're purifying water with their waypoint. But here's where it gets really cool. They're hooked up to Starlink, and they've created a localized data center. So they're selling their electricity basically for powering AI and for the data center, and they're getting paid, I think, like 10 cents a kilowatt hour for that as well. They're using that AI to also do localized teaching at schools and to use in a local health center. They're even selling, if they've got some extra electrons that nobody are using at the time, they're using it to sell for crypto mining as well. These guys are figuring out how to monetize every aspect of this little waypoint, which is essentially a mini grid from a remote area in Djibouti. So when you got people like that doing that, just imagine what the potential is. If you got no electricity, you're behind on everything related,
right.
So.
Right. I mean, to that point, that's all about systems thinking, right?
Yeah.
From the beginning, figuring out how you can transform all these different things. And that's like, what, 2 guys doing that?
It's a couple of guys who I heard about. So actually, it's funny. They came up to me because when I was Power Africa coordinator, one of the last blogs that I wrote, and was this aha moment, because I get really annoyed when I hear people say, in Africa, it's going to be different. It's going to be like the mobile phones, and we're going to leapfrog over landlines, and we're going to have these distributed systems. And I kept saying, mini grids still have wires going from the mini grid to the house. That's not wireless. You're not going to get the leapfrog. Then I had this aha moment saying, wait a second. What if you actually created the mini grid and used it and made the battery the commodity, and you used it to charge electric vehicles, to power electric vehicles where people could have swappable batteries and discharge from their house. So I wrote a blog about it. I'm like, I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but businesses, you guys figure it out.
Right.
And these guys came up to me and are like, hey, we read your blog and we started this company. And ultimately, are they going to make a lot of money from the two-wheelers? They're making some, but these guys on their own came up with the whole thing of like AI and crypto, currency, like selling it because they can buy power from anywhere in the world. So it's like when you bet on a bunch of smart entrepreneurs who kind of figure it out, that you give them 5-10 years, these guys are going to figure something out, how to monetize it and make it something.
And scale it.
Totally. How to scale it. And this is their third one. So they did one in Jamaica. They did one in Indonesia and the one in Djibouti. They're like, wait, now we got this. And now we know how we need to size it to make this like really profitable, and then we can scale it.
And even for them, even if they don't end up scaling it to the level that they think other people think, I think other organizations and people can look at this.
Absolutely.
And use this, which is a huge thing.
First movers always getting the short end of the stick, right? They're like, look at all the stuff that we did. We figured it out. And they're like, all the big players sit there on the sidelines like, yeah, it's interesting. Okay, now we're going to buy you, and now we're going to scale it, and thank you very much. Which is okay. That's the market. But yes, that's exactly what will happen. So I'm really excited about it because what's innovative about M300, it's not just the technology play, but it's the financial structuring of what we're doing as well. It's unique and it's never been done before, and it's never been done at this scale. And I can tell you a little bit about that.
I know. I'd love to hear about it.
So what's going on is the World Bank has access to these resources called IDA. It's International Development Association resources. And it's a huge pool of inexpensive capital. And so they've already said that they're going to commit at least $20 billion of this IDA money to provide grants and concessional financing to governments and organizations to make this happen. So that's $20 billion right there. Then the International Monetary Fund has this other source of funding called Resilience and Sustainability Trust money that's climate related, that we're going to see if we can help try to mobilize some of that capital. Why is that important? So within like the big capital stack, like why are investments not happening in a lot of these markets, is private capital doesn't want to come in because they see it as too risky or the returns aren't great enough. And our hope is that by using this public source of money, the concessional capital will bring down the cost. So you take that, then you couple that with philanthropic money that can maybe take first loss on investments, plus some of the grant money that's available from places like USAID and Power Africa and other governments and things like that. Even grant capital from the African governments themselves. And then you make all the regulatory reforms. You create this whole ecosystem that the private sector sees it appropriately de-risked, that they say, all right, we're going to come in now and we're going to be able to earn the return that we need to return. We're sufficiently protected because they see the opportunity. And so that's the goal. And then the other thing is with what we're trying to do is one of the biggest challenges with energy access is the ability to pay. So it's all great to like give somebody electricity for a light bulb, but if it doesn't improve their jobs at all, if it doesn't make them any more efficient, they don't have any money to pay for the electricity. So it's just like what we did in the US with the Rural Electrification Act going back like 100 years, where when we started rolling out rural electrification in the US, GE was right there behind going to communities and selling their appliances. So you're basically creating this whole ecosystem where you're creating demand for the electricity, which improves people's lives, which makes the projects more sustainable, but also helps people become more efficient so they can increase their incomes as well. So in Africa, it's everything from powering mills for cassava or rice, electric irrigation, things like that, but for manufacturing as well. So we're very heavily focused on what we're calling the productive use levels of electricity and not just like the basic light bulb swinging in somebody's house.
Right. Yeah, philanthropic dollars. I mean, I wrote the note here that the Rockefeller Foundation and Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet, they're committing an initial $10 million for a new technical assistance facility. Yeah. So I'm guessing that's going to be huge, right, in the grand scheme of things.
10 million is peanuts, okay? It's huge, but it's peanuts, right, for what's needed. But already, like I've been on the job for just over a month, we've already committed that 10 million. Like we went through with the World Bank and the African Development Bank, and we said, all right, what are the projects that need support? They gave us a list of about 30 some odd projects. We went through them. We said, show us the projects that are going to have the most direct linkage to people getting access to electricity. They got to be done within 12 months. And we're going to prioritize that. So we tentatively approved, I think, 15 projects in, I think, 10 or 11 countries. I personally have gone through all of them multiple times. We're talking to people on the ground to make sure it makes sense to do it. So we're already like...
And you've been on the job how long?
About 5 weeks, in the first 3 weeks. This is why they brought me on.
Yeah.
Like they knew, like, I'm going to be like, we're just going to get this done. We're going to get it done. Because it's what's important. Like we can all be at these events talking about it.
Right.
Or we can dig in and get the projects done. And that's what we're doing. So part of my role is to kind of be a pain in the rear of all of these organizations and say, all right, guys, does it make sense? Is this the best money for us to spend? That's what we did with Power Africa. It was like, Power Africa, we had 2 metrics: connections and megawatts. And if someone came to me and wanted something for something else, I'm like, is it going to advance our megawatts or connections goals? I'm like, no, we're not doing it. So that's kind of the approach that I'm really trying to push on M300 is say, all of this technical assistance is well and good, or this project's well and good. Is it going to help us achieve the connections? That's the answer that everybody has to ask.
So I guess the final question here, I know we're wrapping up, but back to the beginning, we talked about electrifying 300 million people by the year 2030. My question is, what happens after that? You talked about it in the beginning a little bit of going from 300 million to 600 million, but what are you hoping to accomplish through this whole project, this Mission 300, and the outcomes?
So what happens after that? As more and more people, okay, let's I'm gonna give you an example. So this is a climate podcast, right? So let's talk about things like, everyone will say, well, we need to be working towards small modular nuclear, right?
Right.
The cost of small modular nuclear is all the way up here. It's not the solution for Africa where people are down here in terms of what they can pay. But what you do is, as people get access to electricity, their incomes go up more and more. And over that same time period, the cost of some of these newer technologies come down. And eventually you meet in the middle. And we do see this completely, green transition. This is why I'm saying that to achieve a real green transition, whether it's green hydrogen or small modular nuclear, or all these other technologies that people love to promote as like the silver bullet, they're not silver bullets if people can't afford them. You got to get those prices down, and you have to get incomes up. And once you get those and they meet in the middle, the market's going to work really, really well. So I've got complete confidence that if we can achieve this 300 million goal, and we give a little bit more time for technology prices to come down, and we see how to make the economics work, the rest of it will solve itself over time.
Yeah, like I said in the beginning, I'm from Georgia, and we had Plant Vogtle, the nuclear reactor, go live. Huge cost overruns, huge time overruns. So I know from an economic perspective, people can see that and be like, we can't do that.
No, like I get really frustrated when people are promoting like new technologies as a silver bullet to solve the problems. Like there are plenty of existing technologies that are commercially viable at scale and have been scaled in other countries that haven't even been deployed yet in Africa. So we just need to get the investment there to make those happen.
Yeah. Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was fun. Thanks.